The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of London as tourists gathered around Buckingham Palace. Among the crowd stood General Viktor Kozlov, a decorated military officer from a small Eastern European nation. His chest displayed rows of medals that caught the sunlight, each one representing years of service and countless battles. At 52 years old, Kozlov had commanded respect wherever he went in his homeland, where soldiers would snap to attention at the mere sight of his uniform. Today was different. Today he was just another tourist in a foreign land, but General Kozlov had never learned to blend into crowds. His military bearing remained rigid, his eyes constantly scanning the area as if surveying a battlefield. The casual atmosphere around the palace gates irritated him. Children ran freely, couples took selfies, and street performers entertained the masses with juggling acts and music. This is no way to honor a royal residence, Kozlov muttered to his aide, Captain Petrov, who had accompanied him on this diplomatic visit to London. Look at this chaos. In our country, such disrespect would never be tolerated. Captain Petrov nodded nervously, knowing his superior's temperament well. The general had a reputation for demanding order and discipline in every situation. Even during their brief stay in London, he had criticized everything from the hotel service to the way British soldiers conducted themselves during the changing of the guard ceremony they had witnessed the previous. As they approached the palace gates, General Kozlov noticed the Queen's Guard standing motionless in their iconic red tunics and tall black bearskin hats. These were the soldiers he had come to see, having heard stories of their legendary discipline and unwavering dedication to duty. However, his first impression was one of skepticism rather than admiration. They look like toy soldiers, he commented loudly, not caring who might overhear. All for show, no substance. Real soldiers move, they respond. They command respect through action, not through standing still like statues. The general's voice carried across the crowd, and several tourists turned to look at the imposing figure in the foreign military uniform. His criticism continued as he pointed out what he perceived as weaknesses in their positioning and questioned their ability to respond to real threats. What General Kozlov did not realize was that the Queen's Guards he was observing were among the most elite soldiers in the British Army. These men had served in combat zones around the world, from Afghanistan to Iraq, before earning the honor of protecting the royal family. Their stillness was not a sign of weakness, but a demonstration of incredible mental discipline and physical endurance. Guard Michael Thompson, standing at his post near the main gate, could hear every word of the general's critique. At 28 years old, Thompson had completed 3 tours of duty in Afghanistan before joining the Queen's Guard. His fellow guards, positioned throughout the area, were equally experienced and decorated soldiers. They had learned to ignore the comments of tourists, but something about this particular visitor's tone was different. The general continued his commentary, growing bolder as he noticed what he mistook for the guard's inability to respond to his presence. He began to walk closer to guard Thompson's position, his voice rising as he addressed the crowd around him. You see how they ignore a fellow military officer? Kozlov announced to anyone within earshot. In a proper army, soldiers acknowledge their superiors. These guards show no respect for rank or experience. Captain Petrov tugged gently at his superior's sleeve, sensing that the situation might escalate beyond diplomatic courtesy. General, perhaps we should continue our tour, he suggested quietly. But Kozlov was not finished. His pride had been wounded by what he perceived as disrespect from soldiers he considered inferior. In his mind, his rank and experience should command immediate recognition and deference. Regardless of national boundaries, the crowd around them had grown larger, with many people pulling out their phones to record what was becoming an increasingly tense situation. Some tourists looked uncomfortable, sensing the rising tension, while others seemed excited by the possibility of witnessing some kind of confrontation. Guard Thompson remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed straight ahead, but his training allowed him to monitor the situation through his peripheral vision. He could see his fellow guards maintaining their positions while staying alert to any potential threat the foreign officer might pose. The general's frustration mounted as his attempts to provoke a response failed. He had expected at least some acknowledgement of his presence, some sign that these guards recognized his authority and experience. Instead, he was met with what appeared to be complete indifference. This is insulting, Kozlov declared, his accent becoming thicker as his emotions intensified. "I have commanded thousands of soldiers, fought in real battles, earned my position through blood and sacrifice. These ceremonial soldiers dare to ignore me?" The atmosphere around the palace gates had shifted dramatically. What had started as a peaceful morning of sightseeing had transformed into a diplomatic incident waiting to happen. The general's aide looked increasingly worried, knowing that any serious confrontation could have consequences far beyond this moment. Meanwhile, the Queen's guards continued their duty exactly as they had been trained to do. Their commitment to protecting the royal family and maintaining the dignity of their position remained unwavering, regardless of the challenges presented by difficult visitors. As the tension continued to build, neither the general nor the watching crowd could have predicted what would happen next. The Queen's guards were about to demonstrate why they were considered among the most professional soldiers in the world, and their response would leave the demanding foreign general completely speechless. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test the limits of military protocol, diplomatic courtesy, and personal pride. In the heart of London, with dozens of witnesses and cameras recording every moment, two different military traditions were about to clash in a way that none of the participants could have anticipated. General Kozlov's patience had reached its breaking point. The longer the Queen's guards ignored his presence, the more his anger grew. In his homeland, such behavior would be considered insubordination of the highest order. He had spent decades climbing through military ranks, earning respect through decisive leadership and unwavering authority. The idea that these guards would treat him as just another tourist was beyond his comprehension. "Enough of this nonsense," the general announced loudly, taking several bold steps toward Guard Thompson's position. The crowd around them instinctively stepped back, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Phones were raised higher, cameras focused, and conversations died down as everyone waited to see what would unfold. Captain Petrov's face had gone pale with worry. He recognized the signs of his superior's escalating temper and knew that international incidents had started over much smaller provocations. "Sir, please," he whispered urgently. "We are guests in this country. Perhaps we should show restraint." But General Kozlov was beyond listening to advice. His military pride had been challenged, and in his mind, backing down would be a sign of weakness. He stopped just outside the traditional boundary that tourists were expected to maintain around the guards and raised his voice even louder. "I am General Viktor Kozlov of the Eastern European Defense Forces," he declared, his accent thick with emotion. "I demand the respect due to my rank and experience. I have commanded more soldiers than you have ever seen, fought in conflicts that would test the courage of any man." Guard Thompson remained motionless, but other guards positioned around the palace grounds had begun to take notice of the situation. Through subtle glances and almost imperceptible movements, they communicated with each other, assessing the potential threat level and preparing for whatever might come next. The general's frustration reached a new peak when his dramatic announcement was met with continued silence. In his country, such a declaration would have resulted in immediate attention from every soldier within hearing distance. Here it seemed to have no effect whatsoever. "Are you deaf?" Kozlov shouted, moving even closer to Guard Thompson. "Are you blind? Can you not see the rank insignia on my uniform? Can you not recognize a superior officer when one stands before you?" The crowd was now completely silent, creating an eerie atmosphere around the palace gates. Even the street performers had stopped their acts to watch the unfolding drama. Some tourists looked genuinely concerned about the general's aggressive behavior, while others seemed fascinated by this unexpected entertainment. What the general failed to understand was that the Queen's guards were highly trained to deal with exactly these types of situations. Their training included extensive preparation for handling difficult visitors, protesters, and even potential security threats. Every guard knew precisely when and how to respond to various levels of provocation, while maintaining their primary duty of protection. Guard Thompson, despite his outward appearance of indifference, was carefully monitoring every aspect of the general's behavior. His training allowed him to assess body language, vocal patterns, and movement dynamics to determine threat levels. So far, while the general was clearly agitated and demanding, he had not crossed the line into behavior that would require active intervention. The general's voice grew even louder as he continued his tirade. "In my country, soldiers understand honor, duty, and respect for their superiors. These guards are a disgrace to the uniform they wear. They lack the basic courtesy that should exist between military professionals. Captain Petrov made another attempt to calm his superior. General, please consider that these guards may have specific orders about interacting with visitors. Perhaps their silence is not disrespect but professional discipline. Professional discipline? Kozlov scoffed. Professional discipline includes acknowledging the presence of a superior officer. Professional discipline means showing proper military courtesy. What I see here is ignorance and arrogance disguised as duty. The irony of the situation was completely lost on the general. While he criticized the guards for what he perceived as unprofessional behavior, his own conduct was becoming increasingly inappropriate for a military officer in a foreign country. His loud demands and aggressive posture were creating exactly the kind of diplomatic embarrassment that Captain Petrov had feared. Several tourists had begun recording the confrontation on their phones, and some were already sharing the videos on social media platforms. The incident was rapidly becoming public in ways that neither the general nor his aide had anticipated. Meanwhile, the Queen's Guards continued to demonstrate the very professionalism that the general claimed they lacked. Despite the ongoing provocation, they maintained their positions, protected their posts, and preserved the dignity of their service. Their commitment to duty remained absolute, regardless of the challenges presented by difficult visitors. Guard Thompson could hear everything the general was saying, but his training and experience had taught him the value of patience and restraint. He had faced far more dangerous situations during his military service, and an angry foreign officer posed no real threat to his ability to perform his duties. As the general's frustration continued to mount, he made a decision that would escalate the situation beyond anything he had intended. He decided that if the guards would not acknowledge his verbal demands for respect, he would force them to respond through more direct action. The watching crowd sensed a shift in the atmosphere as the general's body language became more aggressive. Captain Petrov stepped closer to his superior, ready to intervene if necessary, but knowing that his ability to control the situation was limited. What happened next would test every aspect of the Queen's Guard's training and professionalism, while providing the general with a lesson in military protocol that he would never forget. The tension around Buckingham Palace had reached a critical point. General Kozlov, his face red with anger and embarrassment, made a decision that would change everything. He stepped directly into Guard Thompson's personal space, positioning himself mere inches from the motionless soldier. "Look at me when I speak to you," the general commanded, his voice now a harsh whisper that somehow seemed more threatening than his previous shouting. "I am talking to you, soldier. In any proper military, ignoring a superior officer is grounds for severe punishment." The crowd held its breath. Even those who had never served in the military could sense that the general had crossed an invisible line. The atmosphere became electric with tension as everyone waited to see how the Queen's Guard would respond to this direct challenge. Captain Petrov watched in horror as his superior's behavior deteriorated beyond any hope of diplomatic recovery. He knew that whatever happened next would likely have consequences that extended far beyond this moment. International relations, military reputations, and careers could all be damaged by the events unfolding before dozens of witnesses. What the general did not realize was that by entering the Guard's immediate personal space, he had triggered specific protocols that the Queen's Guards were trained to follow. These protocols had been developed over centuries of protecting the royal family, and were designed to handle exactly this type of situation. Guard Thompson remained perfectly still, but his fellow guards had begun to move with subtle precision. To the untrained eye, nothing appeared to be happening. But the Queen's Guards were actually implementing a coordinated response that had been practiced countless times during their training. The general, interpreting the continued stillness as weakness, decided to push even further. "I have seen combat, real combat," he hissed at Guard Thompson. "I have led men into battle, made life and death decisions, earned my rank through blood and sacrifice. What have you done? Stand still and look pretty for tourists?" His words echoed across the courtyard, reaching not only the immediate crowd but also other guards positioned throughout the palace grounds. The general's criticism of their service and dedication struck at the heart of what these soldiers represented. Unknown to General Kozlov, Guard Thompson had indeed seen real combat. During his 3 tours in Afghanistan, He had led rescue missions, survived roadside bombings, and saved the lives of fellow soldiers under enemy fire. His fellow guards shared similar experiences, having served with distinction in some of the world's most dangerous conflict zones before earning the honor of protecting the royal family. The general's next action would prove to be his biggest mistake. Frustrated by the guard's continued silence and motivated by what he perceived as disrespect, he reached out and actually touched Guard Thompson's uniform, attempting to force some kind of response. The moment the general's hand made contact with the guard's red tunic, everything changed. What had been a verbal confrontation suddenly became a physical incident, triggering protocols that the Queen's guards were specifically trained to implement. In one fluid motion that seemed to happen in slow motion, Guard Thompson turned his head exactly 45 degrees to the right, his eyes locking directly onto General Kozlov's face for the first time. The precision of the movement was startling, and the intensity of the guard's gaze was unlike anything the general had ever experienced. "Sir, you will step back immediately," Guard Thompson said in a voice that was calm but carried absolute authority. His words were clear, professional, and completely uncompromising. "You are interfering with a Queen's guard in the performance of his duty." The crowd gasped audibly. After nearly 30 minutes of complete silence, the guard's sudden speech was shocking. But more than that, the command in his voice was unmistakable. This was not a ceremonial soldier playing dress-up for tourists. This was a combat veteran with years of experience dealing with threats both foreign and domestic. General Kozlov was momentarily stunned. The transformation in the guard's demeanor was so complete and unexpected that he found himself taking an involuntary step backward. The eyes that looked at him held no fear, no uncertainty, and no deference to his rank or position. "Furthermore," Guard Thompson continued, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent courtyard, "any further interference with the Queen's Guard will result in your immediate detention by palace security and notification of the appropriate diplomatic authorities." Captain Petrov seized the moment to intervene, grabbing his superior's arm and attempting to pull him away from the confrontation. "General, please, we must leave now," he pleaded, understanding better than his superior how seriously the situation had escalated. But the general was not ready to concede defeat. His pride had been challenged, and the guard's authoritative response had only increased his determination to assert his authority. "You dare threaten me?" he demanded. "I am a general in a sovereign nation's military. You have no authority over me." What happened next would demonstrate to the general, the watching crowd, and eventually the world through social media, exactly what the Queen's Guard represented and why they were considered among the most professional soldiers in the world. Guard Thompson's response would be measured, appropriate, and completely devastating to the general's assumption of superiority. The lesson in military protocol and professional conduct was about to begin in earnest. Guard Thompson's eyes never wavered from General Kozlov's face as he delivered his response with the precision of a master military strategist. "Sir, I am Guardsman Michael Thompson, 1st Battalion Grenadier Guards, veteran of 3 combat deployments to Afghanistan, recipient of the Military Cross for Valor Under Fire." The general's confident expression began to falter as the guard continued, his voice maintaining perfect military bearing while delivering information that shattered every assumption Kozlov had made. "I have served under direct enemy fire for over 18 months of cumulative combat time, led rescue operations behind enemy lines, and have been personally responsible for saving the lives of 12 fellow soldiers during active combat operations." The crowd around them had grown completely silent, hanging on every word. Even Captain Petrov stopped trying to pull his superior away, realizing that something extraordinary was happening. "My fellow guards standing at their posts today," Thompson continued without moving anything except his mouth, "include veterans of Iraq, Afghanistan, the Falklands, and Northern Ireland. Between us, we represent over 200 years of combined military service and more decorations for valor than I suspect you have seen in your entire career." General Kozlov's face had gone from red with anger to pale with shock. This was not the response he had expected from what he had assumed were ceremonial soldiers with no real military experience. "We maintain our positions in silence not because we lack the courage to speak, but because we possess the discipline to focus entirely on our duty. That duty, sir, is the protection of Her Majesty the Queen and the royal family. a responsibility we take more seriously than our own lives." The guard's words carried across the courtyard with crystal clarity, reaching not only the immediate crowd but also tourists and staff throughout the area. Phones continued recording, capturing every moment of what was becoming a masterclass in military professionalism. "You mistake our silence for weakness," Thompson continued, "but I assure you, sir, that is a grave error in judgment. We remain silent because we are focused. We stand still because we are disciplined. We ignore provocations because we understand that our duty transcends personal pride." General Kozlov found himself unable to respond. Every word the guard spoke revealed the depth of his own misunderstanding and the foolishness of his behavior. He had come to London expecting to find soldiers inferior to those in his own command. But instead, he was facing a level of military professionalism that exceeded anything in his experience. "The respect you demand, sir, is something that must be earned through service, sacrifice, and honor. It cannot be commanded through loud words or aggressive behavior. True military leaders understand this principle." Captain Petrov watched his superior's face as the reality of the situation became clear. The general had not only embarrassed himself, but had done so in front of an audience that was documenting every moment for the world to see. Guard Thompson then did something that nobody expected. He turned his head back to its original position, resuming his post as if the entire confrontation had never happened. But his final words hung in the air like a challenge that could not be ignored. "Sir, if you wish to observe the Queen's Guard, you are welcome to do so from an appropriate distance. If you wish to continue disrupting our duties, you will be removed from the premises. The choice is entirely yours." The transformation was remarkable. In less than 2 minutes, Guard Thompson had completely reversed the power dynamic of the confrontation. Where General Kozlov had attempted to use his rank and experience to demand respect, the guard had simply stated facts that demonstrated superior training, experience, and dedication. The crowd began to murmur with appreciation for the guard's response. Many tourists who had initially been uncomfortable with the general's aggressive behavior now looked at him with obvious disapproval. The social media posts that were already spreading across the internet portrayed him not as a wronged military officer, but as a bully who had been professionally and thoroughly put in his place. General Kozlov stood frozen, realizing that any further action would only deepen his humiliation. He had demanded respect, and instead had revealed his own lack of understanding about what true military professionalism meant. Captain Petrov finally succeeded in getting his superior's attention. "General, we should leave now," he whispered urgently. "The situation cannot be improved by remaining here." But the general's ordeal was far from over. As word of the confrontation spread throughout the area, other Queen's Guards began to demonstrate their own form of coordinated response. What happened next would show General Kozlov exactly what military precision and unit cohesion actually looked like when executed by truly elite soldiers. The lesson in humility was about to become even more profound as the general discovered that he had not been dealing with just one exceptional soldier, but with an entire unit of warriors whose dedication to duty and professional standards exceeded anything he had previously encountered. The stage was set for a demonstration of military excellence that would leave the demanding foreign general not just speechless, but completely humbled by the experience. As General Kozlov stood in stunned silence, something remarkable began to happen around the palace grounds. Without any visible signal or audible command, the Queen's Guards throughout the area began to demonstrate the kind of coordination and precision that comes only from years of elite military training. Guard Thompson had returned to his original position, standing motionless once again, but his words had triggered a response from his fellow guards that would provide the general with a lesson he would never forget. From across the courtyard, another guard stepped forward with military precision and spoke in a clear, authoritative voice. Guardsman James Mitchell, 2nd Battalion Scots Guards, veteran of 4 deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, recipient of the Distinguished Conduct Medal for actions under enemy fire. Before General Kozlov could process this new development, another voice joined from a different position. Guardsman Robert Davies, Welsh Guards, 6 years active combat service, survivor of 3 IED attacks, decorated for exceptional bravery in the face of enemy action. The pattern continued as guard after guard identified themselves, each one revealing a background of serious military service that far exceeded anything the general had assumed possible. These were not ceremonial soldiers playing at being warriors. They were genuine combat veterans who had earned their positions through blood, sweat, and unwavering dedication to duty. Guardsman William Scott, Irish Guards, served in the Balkans, Iraq, and Afghanistan, specialist in urban warfare and counterterrorism operations. Guardsman Andrew Thompson, Coldstream Guards, decorated sniper with confirmed operations in 3 different conflict zones. Instructor in advanced marksmanship. Captain Petrov watched in amazement as the display continued. In his years of service alongside General Kozlov, he had never witnessed such a demonstration of unit cohesion and professional excellence. Each guard spoke with quiet authority, stating facts rather than boasting, presenting credentials that spoke for themselves. The crowd around the palace gates had grown larger as word of the extraordinary confrontation spread. Tourists and locals alike stood mesmerized by the guards' response, many recording the proceedings on their phones while others simply watched in awe of the military precision being displayed. General Kozlov found himself surrounded not by silence, but by a chorus of military accomplishments that dwarfed his own experience. Each guard who spoke revealed years of combat service, decorations for valor, and expertise in various aspects of modern warfare. The collective experience represented by these soldiers was staggering. Guardsman Mark Williams, 1st Battalion Welsh Guards, specialist in explosive ordnance disposal, veteran of operations in Sierra Leone, Iraq, and Afghanistan, recipient of the George Medal for bomb disposal under extreme conditions. The General's medals, which had seemed so impressive when he arrived at the palace, now felt inadequate compared to the combat credentials being presented by soldiers he had dismissed as mere ceremonial ornaments. What made the display even more impressive was the coordination involved. Without any apparent signal or leadership, the guards had organized their response to provide maximum impact while maintaining their primary duties. Some guards continued their silent watch while others spoke, ensuring that security was never compromised for the sake of making a point. Guardsman Paul Anderson, Grenadier Guards, former Special Forces liaison, veteran of classified operations across multiple theaters, decorated for actions that remain classified to this day. The revelations continued, each one adding another layer to the general's growing understanding of his massive misjudgment. These guards represented some of the most experienced and decorated soldiers in the British military, men who had volunteered for the most dangerous assignments and had proven themselves under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Captain Petrov noticed that his superior's rigid military posture had begun to sag as the weight of his error became clear. The general had not only insulted these soldiers, but had done so based on assumptions that were completely wrong. The final guard to speak delivered what amounted to the coup de grace to the general's wounded pride. Guardsman Stephen Foster, Scots Guards, former member of 22 SAS, veteran of operations on 4 continents, holder of the Victoria Cross for extraordinary heroism in the face of overwhelming enemy forces. The Victoria Cross, Britain's highest military decoration for valor, could only be awarded for the most exceptional acts of courage under enemy fire. General Kozlov knew enough about military honors to understand that he was in the presence of a soldier whose bravery had been recognized at the highest possible level. As the guards finished their presentations and returned to their silent vigil, the general found himself facing a reality that completely contradicted everything he had believed about these soldiers. Rather than the inexperienced ceremonial troops he had imagined, he had encountered some of the most elite warriors in the world. The crowd around them had fallen completely silent, sensing that they had witnessed something extraordinary. The general's earlier demands for respect now seemed not just inappropriate, but absurdly misplaced. Captain Petrov made one final attempt to salvage what remained of their dignity. "General," he whispered urgently, "we really must leave now. This situation has gone far beyond what can be recovered." But General Kozlov was no longer thinking about recovery or saving face. He was beginning to understand that he had been taught a lesson about military professionalism that would stay with him for the rest of his career. The question now was whether he would have the wisdom to learn from it, or the stubbornness to continue down a path that could only lead to further humiliation. The silence that followed the guard's coordinated presentation was deafening. General Kozlov stood frozen in place, his mind reeling from the devastating revelation of his own ignorance. Every assumption he had made, every criticism he had voiced, every demand for respect he had issued now seemed not just wrong but embarrassingly foolish. Captain Petrov watched his superior struggle with the reality of the situation. In all their years of service together, he had never seen the general so completely outmaneuvered and humbled. The proud military officer, who had entered the palace grounds with such confidence, was now facing the consequences of his arrogance and prejudice. The crowd around them seemed to sense that they were witnessing a moment of profound significance. Many of the tourists who had recorded the confrontation were already sharing the videos on social media, where they would soon go viral and be seen by millions of people around the world. General Kozlov finally found his voice, but when he spoke, it was barely above a whisper. I did not realize he began, then stopped, unable to complete the thought. How could he explain that he had based his entire assessment on appearances rather than facts? How could he justify his behavior, now that he understood the caliber of soldiers he had insulted? Guard Thompson, who had initiated the guard's response, remained in his original position, eyes forward, silent once again. But his earlier words continued to echo in the general's mind. The respect you demand, sir, is something that must be earned through service, sacrifice, and honor. The irony was not lost on anyone present. While demanding respect based on his rank and position, the general had demonstrated none of the qualities that actually earn respect among military professionals. He had shown no humility, no wisdom, no understanding of the soldiers he was addressing, and no appreciation for the duty they were performing. Captain Petrov finally succeeded in getting his superior to move, gently guiding him away from Guard Thompson's position. But as they walked, the general could not escape the feeling that every guard they passed was aware of his humiliation. Their continued silence now seemed not like ignorance or disrespect, but like professional courtesy towards someone who had embarrassed himself so thoroughly. Sir, Captain Petrov said quietly as they moved toward the palace gates, perhaps we should return to the hotel and reconsider our schedule for the remainder of the visit. The general nodded absently, his mind still processing what had just occurred. He had come to London as part of a diplomatic mission, representing his country and his military. Now he wondered what kind of reports would reach his superiors about his behavior at Buckingham Palace. As they walked, the general began to notice details he had missed during his angry confrontation. The guards' uniforms were immaculate, their positions precisely maintained, their bearing absolutely professional. What he had initially dismissed as mere pageantry was actually the external manifestation of extraordinary military discipline. The tourists around them were no longer looking at the general with curiosity or entertainment. Instead, many regarded him with obvious disapproval. His behavior had been witnessed and recorded by dozens of people, and the general consensus seemed to be that he had behaved badly and deserved the professional rebuke he had received. One elderly British gentleman approached as they neared the gates. "Excuse me," he said politely to the general, "but I feel compelled to tell you that those guards you criticized are among the finest soldiers our nation has ever produced. They have served with honor in some of the world's most dangerous places, and they deserve better than the treatment you gave them today." The rebuke stung because it was delivered with the same quiet dignity that the guards had shown throughout the confrontation. There was no anger, no shouting, just a simple statement of fact that highlighted the general's poor judgment and inappropriate behavior. Captain Petrov thanked the gentleman and continued guiding his superior toward their waiting car. The diplomatic vehicle that had brought them to the palace now seemed like a refuge from the humiliation they were leaving behind. As they reached the vehicle, General Kozlov turned back toward the palace one final time. From this distance, the Queen's guards looked exactly as they had when he first arrived, motionless sentries in their traditional uniforms, standing watch over one of the world's most famous royal residences. But everything had changed in the general's perception. Where he had once seen weakness, he now recognized strength. Where he had perceived ignorance, he now understood profound professionalism. Where he had demanded respect, he now realized he had encountered soldiers whose accomplishments far exceeded his own. The driver opened the car door, and Captain Petrov waited for his superior to enter. But the general hesitated, still staring back at the guards who had taught him such a devastating lesson in military excellence. "Captain," he said finally, his voice heavy with the weight of his realization, I believe I have made a terrible mistake today. It was the first sign that the proud general might actually be capable of learning from the humiliation he had brought upon himself. But whether this moment of clarity would lead to genuine change or simply fade into defensive rationalization remained to be seen. The final chapter of this extraordinary confrontation was about to unfold, and it would determine whether General Kozlov would leave London as the same arrogant officer who had arrived, or as a man who had learned a valuable lesson about true military professionalism. General Kozlov stood by the open car door for several long moments, his gaze fixed on the Queen's guards who had so thoroughly demolished his assumptions and his pride. The weight of his realization was almost unbearable. In less than an hour, everything he thought he knew about military excellence, professional conduct, and earning respect had been turned upside down. Captain Petrov watched his superior with growing concern. He had seen the general angry before, frustrated before, even defeated in military exercises, but he had never seen him so completely shaken by the revelation of his own inadequacy. "Sir," Petrov said gently, "we really should leave now. The longer we remain, the more attention this incident will receive." But General Kozlov was not ready to leave. Something inside him, perhaps the same drive that had carried him through decades of military service, would not allow him to simply walk away from this lesson. Against all protocol and certainly against his aide's advice, he began walking back toward the palace gates. "General, what are you doing?" Captain Petrov called out in alarm, hurrying to catch up with his superior. "Something I should have done from the beginning," Kozlov replied, his voice carrying a resolve that Petrov had not heard since their arrival in London. The crowd, many of whom were still lingering to discuss what they had witnessed, watched in amazement as the foreign general who had caused such a commotion returned to the scene of his humiliation. Phones were raised again, anticipating another confrontation, but what happened next would surprise everyone present. General Kozlov walked directly to guard Thompson's position, but this time, he stopped at the appropriate distance that tourists were expected to maintain. He stood at attention, his military bearing now proper and respectful rather than aggressive and demanding. "Guardsman Thompson," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard but without the anger and arrogance that had characterized his earlier words. "I owe you and your fellow guards an apology." The crowd fell silent once again, but this time the atmosphere was different. Where there had been tension and hostility before, there was now something approaching respect and genuine military courtesy. "I came here today with assumptions based on ignorance and prejudice," the general continued, his accent still thick but his words carefully chosen. "I criticize soldiers whose service and sacrifice far exceed my own experience. I demanded respect that I had not earned and showed disrespect to warriors who had proven themselves in ways I never have." Guard Thompson remained motionless, but something in his posture suggested he was listening intently to every word. The other guards throughout the area also seemed to be paying attention, though they maintained their professional demeanor and continued focus on their duties. "I have spent 30 years in military service," General Kozlov said, "but today I learned that time in uniform does not automatically confer wisdom, and rank does not guarantee understanding. You and your fellow guards have shown me what true military professionalism looks like." Captain Petrov stood nearby, amazed by his superior's transformation. This was not the same man who had stormed away from the palace gates in humiliation just minutes before. This was a soldier who had recognized a fundamental truth about leadership and was willing to acknowledge his mistakes publicly. "Your silence was not weakness but strength," the general continued. "Your stillness was not ignorance but discipline. Your dedication to duty, even in the face of my inappropriate behavior, demonstrates a level of professionalism that I had failed to recognize." The crowd around them had grown larger, as word spread that the foreign general was making some kind of public statement. But the audience was no longer hostile or entertained by conflict. Instead, they seemed to recognize that they were witnessing something rare and meaningful. "I cannot undo the disrespect I showed you today," General Kozlov said, "but I can acknowledge it publicly and learn from it. You have taught me more about military honor in 1 hour than I have learned in years of service." For the first time since the confrontation began, Guard Thompson turned his head to look directly at the general. The movement was precise and deliberate, and when their eyes met, there was no longer anger or authority in the guard's gaze, but something approaching professional recognition. "Sir," Guard Thompson said, his voice carrying the same authority as before but without the edge of rebuke. "Your apology is acknowledged and appreciated. It takes courage to admit error, especially in public. That courage is something every soldier can respect." The general nodded, understanding that this was as much acknowledgement as he could reasonably expect. He had been given a lesson in humility, but he had also been offered a path to redemption through honest recognition of his mistakes. "I will return to my country with a new understanding of what military excellence truly means," General Kozlov said, "and I will share that understanding with every soldier under my command. Thank you for the lesson, Guardsman Thompson." With that, the general stepped back, saluted with perfect military precision, and turned to leave. This time his departure was dignified rather than humiliating, purposeful rather than defeated. As he walked toward his waiting car, several members of the crowd began to applaud. The applause was not mocking or sarcastic, but genuine appreciation for a man who had found the courage to admit his mistakes and learn from them. Captain Petrov fell into step beside his superior, no longer worried about diplomatic embarrassment, but impressed by the general's ability to transform a moment of profound humiliation into an opportunity for growth and understanding. "That was well done, sir," Petrov said quietly as they reached their vehicle. General Kozlov paused before entering the car and looked back one final time at the Queen's Guards, who had resumed their silent vigil as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But everything had changed for the general, and he knew that this day would influence his leadership and his understanding of military service for the rest of his career. "Yes," he replied to his aide. "I believe it was. Perhaps the most important thing I have done in years." As their car pulled away from Buckingham Palace, the videos of both the confrontation and the apology were already spreading across social media platforms around the world. The story would be shared millions of times, not as an example of conflict between military traditions, but as a demonstration of how true leaders respond when they discover they have been wrong. General Kozlov returned to his hotel that day as a different man than the one who had left it that morning. He had learned that respect cannot be demanded but must be earned, that assumptions can be dangerous, and that true military excellence is defined not by rank or position but by service, sacrifice, and unwavering dedication to duty. The Queen's Guards, meanwhile, continued their silent watch, having provided a masterclass in professionalism that would be remembered and discussed for years to come. They had shown that the greatest victories are sometimes won not through force or anger, but through quiet dignity, unshakable discipline, and the kind of professional excellence that speaks louder than any words ever could. The foreign general had indeed demanded respect, and the Queen's Guard's response had left him speechless, not with anger or frustration, but with genuine admiration for soldiers whose dedication to duty exceeded anything he had previously encountered.